small town of Cedar Creek, nestled within the dense woods of Pennsylvania, seemed like any other quaint, peaceful community during the daylight hours. However, as the sun dipped below the horizon, whispers of something sinister lurking in the shadows circulated among the locals. The most chilling tale revolved around an old ambulance station situated on the outskirts of the town, where the abandoned building stood as a solemn reminder of a tragic event that had unfolded years ago. I had grown up hearing stories about the haunted ambulance station. My name is Alex Carter, and I was a paramedic who had recently joined the Cedar Creek Emergency Services team. Despite the warnings and eerie tales, I never truly believed in ghosts or the supernatural. That is, until I experienced it firsthand. It was a chilly October evening when the call came through. A car accident had occurred on the winding roads just outside of town, and my partner Sarah and I were dispatched to the scene. As we raced through the darkened streets, the atmosphere seemed to grow heavier, as if the very air around us was thick with foreboding. Arriving at the scene, we found a mangled vehicle wrapped around a tree, the metallic scent of blood hanging in the air. With adrenaline coursing through our veins, we quickly went to work, extracting the injured occupants and stabilizing them as best we could. Among the victims was a young girl, no older than 6, her eyes wide with fear as she clung to consciousness. Despite our efforts, her injuries were severe, and we knew time was running out. With no time to spare, we loaded her into the ambulance and sped off towards the nearest hospital. As we raced down the desolate highway, the tension in the air was palpable. Sarah's knuckles were white as she gripped the steering wheel, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. I sat in the back of the ambulance, monitoring the young girl's vital signs as we hurtled towards our destination. Suddenly, without warning, the engine sputtered and died, leaving us stranded on the darkened road. Panic set in as we frantically tried to restart the engine, but to no avail. With no other options, Sarah and I exchanged a worried glance before deciding to continue on foot. We carefully lifted the young girl onto a stretcher, her small form barely visible in the dim glow of the ambulance's interior lights. With a sense of dread weighing heavy on our hearts, we set off into the darkness, the only sound echoing through the night, the rhythmic thud of our footsteps against the pavement. As we trudged through the darkness, a sense of unease settled over us like a thick fog. Shadows danced at the edge of our vision, and strange whispers seemed to echo through the trees. Sarah and I exchanged nervous glances, our instincts screaming at us to turn back, but we pressed on, driven by the desperate need to save the young girl's life. Suddenly, a piercing scream shattered the silence, causing us to freeze in our tracks. The sound seemed to come from all around us, echoing through the trees like a chilling chorus. With trembling hands, I reached for the flashlight strapped to my belt, casting its feeble beam into the darkness. What I saw next would haunt me for the rest of my days. Figures began to materialize from the shadows, their twisted forms contorted in agony. Some appeared to be victims of past accidents, their bodies mangled and broken beyond recognition. Others seemed to be specters of the night, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. As the ghostly apparitions closed in around us, Sarah and I knew we were in grave danger. With the young girl's life hanging in the balance, we had no choice but to press on, hoping against hope that we could reach help before it was too late. With every step, the darkness seemed to grow thicker, the air heavy with the weight of untold horrors. Shadows writhed at the edge of our vision, and strange whispers seemed to fill the night air. It was as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling around us, threatening to consume us whole. And then, just when all hope seemed lost, we saw it. A faint glimmer of light shining through the trees, like a beacon in the darkness. With renewed determination, we pressed on, following the light until we emerged from the forest into the clearing beyond. As we stumbled into the clearing, we were greeted by the sight of flashing lights and the sound of sirens wailing in the distance. Relief washed over us as we realized we had finally reached help. Paramedics and police officers swarmed around us, their voices a blur as they rushed to tend to the young girl's injuries. As Sarah and I collapsed to the ground, exhausted but alive, I couldn't help but wonder what had brought us to that place. Was it merely a series of unfortunate events, or was there something more sinister at play? I may never know the answer, but one thing is certain. I will never forget the night I encountered the haunted ambulance tragedy. In the days that followed, Sarah and I tried to put the events of that fateful night behind us, but the memories lingered like a shadow, haunting our every waking moment. The young girl we had fought so desperately to save eventually pulled through, her recovery nothing short of miraculous. As for the haunted ambulance station, it remained abandoned and forgotten, a silent testament to the tragedy that had unfolded within its walls. Some said it was cursed. Others dismissed it as mere superstition. But for Sarah and me, the truth was far more terrifying. For in the darkness of that night, we had come face to face with something beyond our understanding, something that defied logic and reason. And though we may never fully comprehend the horrors we witnessed, one thing is certain: the haunted ambulance tragedy would forever be etched into our memories, a chilling reminder of the thin veil that separates the living from the dead. The town of Mercy Hill was nestled deep within the Appalachian Mountains, a place where time seemed to have stood still. Its winding roads snaked through dense forests, leading to isolated homes and forgotten hamlets. Life in Mercy Hill was quiet, but beneath its tranquil facade lurked a sinister secret. As an ambulance driver serving this remote community, I had seen my fair share of tragedy and despair, yet nothing could have prepared me for the horrors that awaited me on those desolate roads. My name is Jake Saunders, and I've been working as a paramedic in Mercy Hill for the past 5 years. From the moment I arrived, I sensed an eerie presence looming over the town, a feeling of dread that seemed to seep into every corner. The people of Mercy Hill were a superstitious bunch, quick to whisper tales of ghostly apparitions and cursed landmarks, but I never paid much attention to their stories, dismissing them as the ramblings of a paranoid community. That was until the night I received a call that would change everything. It was a cold, moonless night when the call came in, a frantic voice crackling over the radio, pleading for help from a remote cabin deep in the woods. Without hesitation, my partner Sarah and I sprang into action, the sirens wailing as we raced through the darkness. As we navigated the winding roads, a sense of unease settled over me. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees looming like silent sentinels. Sarah tried to lighten the mood with small talk, but her words fell flat against the oppressive silence. Finally, we reached the cabin, a dilapidated structure barely visible in the dim glow of our headlights. The air was heavy with the scent of pine and decay, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. We entered the cabin cautiously, our flashlights cutting through the darkness like knives. What we found inside would haunt me for the rest of my days. The interior of the cabin was a scene straight out of a nightmare. A jumble of overturned furniture, shattered glass, and blood-stained walls. In the center of the room lay a man, his body contorted in agony, his eyes wide with terror. As we rushed to his side, he whispered words that sent shivers down my spine, words of ancient curses and vengeful spirits. Sarah tried to calm him, but his fear was palpable, his words a desperate plea for salvation. Suddenly, the cabin was plunged into darkness, a suffocating blackness that seemed to swallow us whole. I fumbled for my flashlight, my heart pounding in my chest as I searched for some sign of our assailant, but there was nothing, just the oppressive silence of the forest, broken only by the sound of our ragged breaths. With trembling hands, I checked the man's vital signs, my mind racing as I tried to make sense of what had happened. His pulse was weak, his breathing shallow, but there was still a flicker of life in his eyes. As Sarah tended to his injuries, I searched the cabin for any clue as to what had brought us here. What I found would chill me to the bone. In the corner of the room, hidden beneath a tattered rug, was a circle of salt, a makeshift barrier meant to ward off evil spirits. Surrounding it were symbols of unknown origin, etched into the floor with blood and ash. It was clear that something dark and malevolent had been unleashed within these walls, a force beyond our understanding, hungry for blood and revenge. As we worked to stabilize the man's condition, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that unseen eyes lurked in the shadows, waiting to pounce. The forest seemed to come alive around us, the trees whispering secrets of ancient evils and forgotten sins. I could feel their gaze upon me, a cold, suffocating presence that threatened to consume me whole. But we couldn't afford to give in to fear. Not now, not when a man's life hung in the balance. With grim determination, we fought to save him, our hands steady despite the rising tide of darkness. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the darkness receded, leaving behind nothing but the echoes of our own breaths. In the days that followed, the events of that fateful night would haunt me like a recurring nightmare. The man we had saved would recover, but his words would linger in my mind, a warning of the horrors that lurked in the shadows of Mercy Hill. I tried to put the experience behind me, to convince myself that it was nothing more than a trick of the mind, a hallucination born of fear and exhaustion. But deep down, I knew the truth. Mercy Hill was a town cursed by its own past, a place where the sins of the past refused to stay buried. And as long as I remained in its shadow, I would always be haunted by the specter of that night. But despite the darkness that lurked within its borders, there was still hope, a glimmer of light amidst the shadows. And as long as there were those willing to fight for it, the town of Mercy Hill would never be lost to the darkness. As I sit here now, penning these words by the light of a flickering candle, I can't help but wonder what other secrets lie hidden within the depths of Mercy Hill, and whether one day they will come back to haunt us once more. It was a dark and stormy night when I first began my shift as an ambulance driver in the small town of Ravenwood. Nestled deep in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, Ravenwood had a history shrouded in mystery and folklore. The townsfolk spoke in hushed tones about the haunted woods that surrounded us, and tales of restless spirits that roamed the countryside. But as a rational man of science, I dismissed these stories as nothing more than superstition. My name is Jack, and I had been working as a paramedic for years, accustomed to the chaos and uncertainty of emergency situations, but nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to experience in Ravenwood. The ambulance station was an old, dilapidated building on the outskirts of town. It was rumored to have once been a funeral home, adding to its eerie atmosphere. My partner for the night was a seasoned paramedic named Sarah. She greeted me with a weary smile as I entered the station, her eyes betraying the exhaustion of countless sleepless nights. "Welcome to Ravenwood, Jack," she said, her voice tinged with a hint of apprehension. "You're in for quite a ride tonight." I shrugged off her warning, attributing it to the stress of the job. Little did I know, Ravenwood had a way of getting under your skin, slowly chipping away at your sanity until you were consumed by fear. Our first call of the night came shortly after midnight. A frantic voice crackled over the radio, pleading for help from the depths of the forest. Without hesitation, Sarah and I sprang into action, racing through the winding roads that led to the heart of the woods. The rain lashed against the windshield, casting eerie shadows that danced across the trees. As we delved deeper into the forest, a sense of unease settled over me like a suffocating blanket. The dense canopy overhead blocked out the moonlight, plunging us into darkness. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life again, this time emitting a series of static-filled whispers that sent a shiver down my spine. I exchanged a nervous glance with Sarah, but she remained focused on the task at hand, her hands gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. After what felt like an eternity, we arrived at the scene of the accident. The car was mangled beyond recognition, its twisted wreckage illuminated by the flashing lights of our ambulance. But there was something else lurking in the darkness, something that sent a chill down my spine. As Sarah and I worked to extricate the injured driver from the wreckage, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every rustle of the leaves, every whisper of the wind seemed to carry with it a malevolent presence that sent my heart racing. Just as we were about to load the driver into the ambulance, a blood-curdling scream pierced the silence, echoing through the forest like a harbinger of doom. Sarah and I exchanged a horrified glance, our instincts screaming at us to flee. But duty called, and we couldn't abandon the injured driver to whatever lurked in the darkness. With trembling hands, we loaded him into the ambulance and began the treacherous journey back to town. The ride back was fraught with tension, every shadow morphing into a potential threat, every sound sending us spiraling into panic. I could feel the eyes of unseen entities boring into my soul, their presence a suffocating weight on my chest. As we neared the outskirts of town, the radio crackled to life once again, emitting a series of frantic pleas for help. Sarah and I exchanged a terrified glance, knowing that whatever awaited us would be far worse than anything we had encountered before. With a sense of dread gnawing at my insides, I steered the ambulance off the main road and onto a narrow dirt path that led deeper into the woods. The darkness closed in around us, swallowing us whole as we plunged into the heart of the forest. Suddenly, the trees parted to reveal a clearing bathed in an otherworldly glow. In the center of the clearing stood a decrepit cabin, its windows glowing with an unearthly light. Without a word, Sarah and I exited the ambulance and approached the cabin, our hearts pounding in our chests. As we stepped inside, a sense of dread washed over me like a tidal wave. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and strange symbols adorned the walls, casting twisted shadows that seemed to dance in the flickering candlelight. But the most chilling sight of all was the figure standing in the center of the room, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. It spoke in a voice that seemed to emanate from the very depths of hell, filling me with a terror unlike anything I had ever known. "You have trespassed into my domain," it said, its voice dripping with malice. "Now you must pay the price." With a flick of its wrist, the figure unleashed a wave of darkness that enveloped us, dragging us down into the depths of despair. Sarah and I screamed as we were consumed by the darkness, our minds shattering into a million pieces as we were plunged into the abyss. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. Sarah and I found ourselves lying on the forest floor, our bodies battered and bruised, but alive. The cabin was nowhere to be seen, as if it had never existed in the first place. As we stumbled back to the ambulance, a sense of disbelief washed over me. Had it all been a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and stress? Or had we truly come face to face with something beyond our understanding? To this day, I still don't have the answers. But one thing is for certain. Ravenwood is a place steeped in darkness, where the line between reality and nightmare is blurred beyond recognition. And as long as I live, I will never forget the horrors that lurk within its haunted woods.